So much of painting is about the setup, and I think it's something that often isn't given enough attention right at the beginning. But if you want something good to be happening over here on the easel, the place to start is over here on the still life stand. I'm Paul Foxton, still life painter and teacher, and I stream live from my studio here in the heart of the English countryside in the Cotswolds. In this video, I'm going to take you through how I set up my still life subjects and crucially how I light them, because the lighting is the most important thing. Remember, when we paint, we're not painting things, we're painting light. We're painting patches of light and dark, and that's what makes an interesting painting, so the lighting is crucial. So I'll take you through all the equipment that I use for my own setups so that you can immediately start to put some of these ideas into work in your own setups and your own paintings too. So if you're a still life painter or a painter of anything really, and you often find yourself sitting looking at the paintings and wondering what it is you need to fix, quite often it might not be the values, it might not be the drawing, it might not be the colour. It might be, and it very often is, that you didn't spend long enough at the beginning making sure the setup and the subject was lit right and it was interesting and compelling. So let's go into the video and we'll find out how I do it. At the moment, obviously it's winter here, it's dark, so I would normally set up a still life in daylight. For about 10 or 15 years I always worked from life, but lately I've been working from photos a little bit too. Funny enough, mostly because it really helps with teaching. And then I've found actually it started to creep into my process as well. But even if I'm working from a photograph, I still set it up in natural daylight. So I'm very lucky I've got two big north-facing windows here. I can't be using them today whilst I'm doing this, so I have light. So I've got a light here, which is the light that I'm going to use to light the still life. So this is a speaker stand. So you can get really expensive still life stands for like £100, $100 or something like that from art shops. Or you can get one of these for about 16 quid, which is more adjustable. It's heavier duty, it's more stable. And you can turn it any way you like as well. And it's got like a rubber thing at the bottom. So what I've got on here is a big MDF board. And this is pretty much my staple for all of my still life setups, okay? Now this here is again just a piece of MDF, which I have primed and then roughly painted over. And the beauty of doing this is you can have any colour you like, light or dark, for the base that you stand your stuff on. Really, really handy, okay? So that takes care of that. Now this light here, you can find these, it's an LED, and you can find them in Google just by sticking in Neewer, which is N-E-W-E-R, 660 bi-colour. And I've got two of these, and this one also has a softbox on it. Now the softbox is really crucial. What it does is it diffuses and softens the light, so it makes it much more like the light that comes through a window rather than the very harsh light, which gives hard-edged shadows, cast shadows, if you don't have a diffuser on it. So that's really important. I'll put a link in the description for this later on. So now I only have this light here. It's the only light I have on. And here is my still life stand, okay? So let's say I was going to paint something really simple and small. This little jug, which I have actually painted loads of times and is one of my favourites. Wouldn't make a bad setup for a painting. The background hasn't really been thought about at all, but we have a decent cast shadow here. Now if you look at the edges of this cast shadow and the edges of the form shadows here, this is why we have the diffuser on the light, because it makes it much more natural looking. The first thing I want is a background, right? Now what I do is this. I have an old box, which I put behind it. This literally just sits behind it there. And the handy thing about this is I could use that as a background, but I've also got a bunch of these. Now this is a background which I've painted, mostly neutral. You'll find this again is personal preference and aesthetic choice, but in my paintings I almost always have very neutral backgrounds. And if I pop that behind it, then it makes a slightly different effect, okay? And I've got a bunch of different ones of those which I can use. I'll show you a couple more. This one, I've painted on both sides, so I've got a darker side and a lighter side. This one is my absolute favourite, and I use this one an awful lot when I'm painting. And in that way, you have complete control over what's here in terms of value and what's here. And it's the value pattern, I think, the shadow and the light, that makes the most difference when you're painting. But here's the bit that I think makes the most difference, okay? What I will then do is control the light. So this light is coming down. You could say it's probably form light. It's slightly in front of the subject and above and to one side. If I get another piece of card, so I'm giving away all my tricks today. This is basically all of the photos that you see me post. This is how they're put together. And you can bring in a shadow. And suddenly this starts to stand out. Let me show you the closer view. So before we had, like this, we have, you could paint it like that and it wouldn't look too bad if you wanted to do it that way. There's nothing wrong with that. But this is way more interesting. And now we also have the lighter side of the subject here is against a shadow here. And the darker side, which is in shadow, is against a lighter background. And it starts to throw it into some kind of relief, and it adds just a little bit of drama to it. Actually, it adds a lot of drama to it. And the other interesting thing about it is, let's see, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the camera or not, but another thing that's really interesting is I now have two very different colours for my background. So say I had, let's see if I've got a frame I can use to show you this. We'll try it with this. Say I had this framed, right, as a composition. And I do this a lot as well. Then I've got a lighter colour for the background over here and a darker one over here. And this one is shadow, which means this is lower chroma on this side, closer to grey. And this has a bit more chroma and a bit more colour to it. So if you isolate it, you can see the difference between the two. This is actually a warmish orange. Let's get another subject, something really beautiful. Okay, so David Austin roses. You know this is one of my favourites. And these ones are a little bit past their best, unfortunately. But like this, there's not an awful lot of interest to them. Let's go back to the close view again so you can see what happens with these. I mean, you could absolutely paint them like that. I mean, it looks like it would make a nice painting, wouldn't it? I mean, they stand out enough from the background. But if we do the same thing again, I'm trying to stay out of the way of the camera and do this at the same time. Suddenly now we've got that same kind of drama. This rose over here is really standing out against the dark background because we've got a much bigger difference in value there. And the shadow over here of this rose at the back is standing out against the lighter part of the background. Starts to look really beautiful. You've got some beautiful subtle light in here. Now it's starting to look like something. A nice diagonal shadow coming along the base back in here. Now it starts to look like, a serious still life, something that you would want to paint that would perhaps move you and have a little more interest, let's say. And this also, if you wanted to try different ways of framing this, I think it's really useful to have a nice quality frame handy. This is they call it what do they call this? I think they call it a primitive mold, because it hasn't got a lot of stuff going on. So this is silver gold leaf, and this is slit painted. Really, this is a nice quality frame. And it's good, I think, to have a few of these around, because you could decide how you wanted to crop this. I mean, that would make a really beautiful painting. And if you bring it further out, then you get a slightly different view. Your setup should already look like a painting before you paint it. It should already be beautiful. If it's not already beautiful before you start working on it, it's unlikely to be that great a painting once you start bringing it out. That would make a beautiful painting, I think, in terms of composition. Just about any of these crops would look great. But it's just because everything has been set up really carefully first. You're not at all limited by the background. Like, say I wanted to have a much lower value background to really make them stand out. That's just a piece of black foam core, really light. You know, I can just put that there and I get an entirely different effect. Even when you've got all of this stuff done and you've got everything set up right, a lot of it depends on whether you generally work from life or whether you work from a photograph, or like me, you might do a little bit of both. If you're working from life, I'm going to have something towards the end of the video. I'll show you how, a little bit, talk about how I set up my easel to make sure that I have good light on the easel and I have the best chance of transferring what I've got over here into something which is going to be compelling and engaging over here. If you're photographing the painting, I'll have a little tidbit of advice that will help you get much better colour, much better photos. Now this is a local grown squash. Okay, you might recognize it from over here. And what I try to do when I'm setting up a still life like this, I mean, you're almost there. You've got a beautiful subject with really beautiful color. The light is set up really nicely. I mean, this is artificial light, but it looks great, you know. It still looks fine, and I would happily paint from this. I would spend personally an awful lot of time just moving stuff around like this, and I can tell you when I set this subject up to paint, I spent a huge amount of time making really small, because every small change that I make to the orientation of the squash changes the value of this here in relation to the light side. The light side's not changing so much in value, but this is changing a lot. Can you see that? It's bringing a lot more reflected light. As this plane here comes more towards the light, it pushes more reflected light in here. Makes it really beautiful, you know. So we already have something really strong. We've got a light against a dark against a light, against a dark against a light, against a dark against a light. Beautiful. So if I bring this in, I mean, there's any number of places I could put this, but I always want to have, I'm thinking about a dark against the light the whole time. Like if I have this like that, then the only bit of light I have is this tiny little sliver here. Okay, so if it's over here, it's not, and this bit here, it's not going to stand out too much. But if I put that over there, then I can get this dark against this light, which works really nicely, which is actually what I ended up doing in the painting. If I had it that way around, I still get this light against that dark. It's not, you know, it kind of looks okay. I almost did it like this, but in the end I decided I preferred it like this. When you're painting, you're not just painting the thing, you're painting light falling on things, and you're painting a pattern of lights and darks. And I'm always trying as much as I can to set up an interesting pattern of lights and darks. So I love this diagonal shadow back here, created by this, which also is movable. You know, you can decide where you want that to go, a bit more mystery if this is disappearing into the background, or a stronger composition of lights and darks. And these directional shadows here really help the composition. You've got a nice strong diagonal down here. I would rarely leave it quite that, let's say, bare. And in fact, I did. I always have around the studio lots of dried leaves, partly because I love painting leaves, but also because you can just, I mean, this is dead mistletoe. You can make a much more interesting still life really, really quickly just by adding a few little bits like that. And then you've gone from having something which would have been really basic to something which looks kind of beautiful by itself. So then if you can take that and do a reasonable study of it, this was painted last night, you know, you're a long way to making a good painting already. So regarding the easel now, if I'm working from life in natural light, I've got a beautiful big window here. Now I always have the subject in between the light source and the easel, and that way if I have enough light coming in from the window, it's going to fall first here. And if it's natural light and not artificial light, there won't be too much drop off, and I'll have enough light falling on the easel over here. I can see my subject and my painting in the same light, and then also the easel is right next to the setup, okay? This is called sight size, and it's like, painters like Sargent painted like this, where they would have their subject right next to the easel, and then they would stand well back, make judgments about what they wanted to change and come over and make the change in the painting and then stand back again. With a small painting like this, you can be fairly close still to the easel. You don't have to go back to the other side of the room. So it's not so bad if you have quite a small working space, but it really helps if you have them right next to each other. So you can do a really quick one-to-one comparison. We call it the eye flick, looking quickly from one to the other and looking for differences if you're looking for an accurate representation of what you've got there. Makes it much easier to check the values, much easier to check the colour. Now, if you're going to photograph your setup for working on later, one thing I really recommend you do before you start is to set the white balance of your camera for the light. Every time you take a photo, and I use one of these, grey card, which you can get pretty cheaply. This is only about 20 quid, I think, something like that. I'll put a link in the description for where you can get hold of these. Have a decent camera, a DSLR, a mirrorless, something like that, and find out how to check, how to set the white balance manually, and do that every time you set up something and take a few photographs of it. It's going to make a huge difference to the quality of the colour, and that will really make a lot of difference when you come to paint from a photograph, because quite often, if you don't bother doing that step first, the colours are going to be a little unnatural, and that will tend to show in the painting too. So as I said earlier, this video is part of a series. I'm streaming now on Thursdays at 6 PM UK time, which I think is 1 PM Eastern time and 10 AM Pacific. I stream live on the Thursdays. The nice thing about the live stream, joining the live stream, is that there will be a chat down the side, so you can ask questions about anything that I'm talking about as we go through. Sometimes it will be painting demonstrations, sometimes it will be something like this. So do subscribe to the channel, and you'll get an alert every time I'm live. Also, what I do then is I take that live stream and I edit it down to a shorter video, just all of the most juicy and interesting bits, and publish that the following day on a Friday. Okay, so please do subscribe if you find this interesting, because there's lots more coming soon.